The ocean is filled with awe and wonder that has captured our imaginations for centuries. Estimated to contain 50 to 80% of Earth's life, yet much is still unknown about it. Maybe you've looked out at the water and thought about the creatures that roam its depths, pondered their beautiful and alien ways. I want to bring you on an adventure to discover the curious and sometimes dangerous animals out there, to learn about the amazing and the odd that we share our planet with. I want to bring you on the hook. New Zealand is a weird place. Its beautiful island shores juxtaposed to volcanic springs, towering glaciers, and steaming hot waterfalls make for stunning and surreal landscapes. As strange as New Zealand is, it's unsurprising to find it home to equally strange creatures, like the weta, tuatara, and perhaps the strangest of all the penguin species, the yellow-eyed penguin. The yellow-eyed penguin is scientifically known as Megadiptes antipodes, which roughly translates to large diver of opposite feet. It's known locally by the Maori people of New Zealand as hoi-ho, which is supposed to be an onomatopoeia for the screeches the birds make. Yeah, I don't hear it either. I say that yellow-eyed penguins are probably the weirdest of all the penguins, and there's a good reason for that. First off, a tropical jungle isn't exactly where the average person would imagine a penguin species. But then again, there are penguins all the way at the equator in the Galapagos, so that isn't too odd. But the weirdest thing about these birds is that they are the only penguin species that is antisocial. The 19 other penguin species are found typically hanging out in large groups, which helps with being vigilant or aware of any threats like predators. But yellow-eyed penguins aren't like this at all. In fact, these penguins are so antisocial that if a breeding pair of penguins can see another penguin from their nest, they won't even lay their eggs. To give themselves some privacy, yellow-eyed penguins build their nests underneath trees, in dense growths of flax, or in man-made boxes created by conservation groups. Now, these penguins do exist in family groups, but once the chick leaves the nest, the family breaks apart and everyone goes their separate ways. Additionally, while most penguins don't really care about humans or how close a human can get to them, yellow-eyed penguins are the only penguin species that have a fear response to a human presence. This fear response triggers a freeze or flight reaction, instead of the typical fight or flight survival mechanism. Either the penguin runs or stands completely still, with its stress hormones rocketing to dangerous levels. This is the precise reason you've probably never seen a yellow-eyed penguin in a zoo or aquarium, and it makes rescuing and caring for wild yellow-eyed penguins a difficult task for conservation groups. So why are these birds so odd compared to other penguins? They certainly aren't the only species of penguin that live in New Zealand. In fact, the footage I took that you're seeing of a Snares penguin was only about 500 feet away from this yellow-eyed penguin in Curio Bay. To best understand this question, we're going to need to cover some evolutionary and geological history. Penguins are thought to have originated on Zealandia, the landmass that would one day become New Zealand, around 66 million years ago, just after the KPG extinction, which ended the dinosaurs. But for Zealandia, the birds would now reign. It's thought that the earliest ancestor of penguins was a diving bird called Waimanu that lived on Zealandia. It was flightless and used its wings to propel itself through the water, just like modern penguins. As Zealandia drifted through the Pacific, the descendants of Waimanu swam to other nearby landmasses, the likes of which would become the penguins of today that we now know about on Antarctica, Australia, Africa, and South America. Over the millennia, these penguins would spread around the southern hemisphere, radiating and changing, but for those birds that stayed on Zealandia, they would remain in almost complete isolation because they never left their ancestral home. About 15 million years ago, a split between the Megadiptes, or yellow-eyed penguins, and the Eudiptes, the crested penguins like macaroni penguins, occurred. The Megadiptes stayed roughly in the same area, but the Eudiptes ventured all around Zealandia and other nearby islands. The most modern of the Megadiptes have remained relatively unchanged in the last 5 million years since Zealandia changed into what is now known as modern New Zealand. Without ever exploring the sea like their relatives, these penguins were never put in under any environmental pressures to evolve. In the sea, they have very few predators, namely New Zealand fur seals and sea lions. But on land, these birds had no worries. Other than 2 species of microbat and the aforementioned seals and sea lions, New Zealand has no native mammals. Zealandia's isolation from the rest of the world allowed birds to fill every ecological niche that mammals would have filled otherwise. Thus, New Zealand answers the question, what if mammals never existed? Birds. Birds would have ruled everywhere. But I digress. So the yellow-eyed penguin never changes due to a lack of any evolutionary pressures. Unlike other penguin species, which learn to form large social groups to protect themselves from skuas, orcas, and any other land-dwelling mammalian predator they might encounter. Instead, they just hung out on New Zealand, where there were essentially no threats. Zealandia was so isolated that a group of reptiles, the Tuatara, who predated the dinosaurs, were able to survive there to this day. All because there were no threats to them, until 800 years ago, when the first humans set foot on New Zealand. These Polynesian descendants would become known as the Maori, and their warrior culture quickly spread among both North and South Islands of New Zealand. The Maori were very connected to nature, but that didn't stop them from hunting the giant flightless birds known as moa to extinction. Fortunately, penguins naturally taste terrible to humans, so were spared the Maori's dinner plates. So the problem isn't so much with the Maori, but instead something they brought with them. The Kior, the Polynesian rat. The Kior posed a new problem to the penguins. They could break open the penguins' eggs to get a meal, and the yellow-eyed penguin had never had to deal with a threat like the Kior, which was already really well adapted to eating bird eggs. This wasn't a huge issue though, because if the parents were sitting on their egg or after the chick had already hatched, the rats couldn't bother them. But in the 1700s, European settlers started to arrive. The Europeans arriving in the late 1700s brought with them rabbits, which are known for doing as rabbits do and quickly spread among the islands. 10 rabbits can consume as much vegetation as a single cow can in a single day. This includes eating the flax plants where our yellow-eyed penguins nest, thus limiting the area where yellow-eyed penguins can build their nests with their required privacy. Things only get worse from here on out. Some European leaders thought bringing over European stoats, which is a kind of weasel, might help control the now rampant rabbit population in New Zealand. Many British and Kiwi naturalists tried to warn that this was a terrible idea, but much like the one scientist who knows better in every natural disaster movie, no one listened to them. In 1880, a Kiwi ornithologist by the name of Walter Buller tried to desperately warn the effects that the stoats would have on local birds, but was also ignored. The stoats were released, and the rabbit population remained the same. Instead, Buller noticed a distinct drop in the next 6 years of every bird species on New Zealand. Stoats are perfectly designed to kill and eat birds, penguins included. Furthermore, with the introduction of dogs and cats, the yellow-eyed penguins faced continued problems, as dogs find the scent of a penguin irresistible and will kill them, but they won't eat them. Feral cats, on the other hand, will kill and eat penguin chicks if the opportunity arises. All of these mammalian invaders have greatly affected yellow-eyed penguin populations, who have no natural defenses against them. But there are 2 other threats that are just as potent. Yellow-eyed penguins, like all other penguins, depend on fishing to feed themselves and their chicks. When yellow-eyed penguins head out to sea to fish, they encounter human fishermen, and are often caught in these fishermen's nets as a result. Yellow-eyed penguins can dive down to about 80 meters for up to 3 minutes, and there they can be scooped up in trawl nets, or even worse, gill nets, which sit on the seafloor for days at a time. Little can be done by the fishermen who depend on the fish they catch for a living to avoid catching penguins, especially when yellow-eyed penguins are known to swim several miles out to sea to forage. Now we reach the worst threat to the yellow-eyed penguin: global warming. You can deny it if you want, but we see its most immediate effects on polar species, and the yellow-eyed penguin is no exception. 2 of the nest areas I visited each had 25 couples of yellow-eyed penguins nesting. On one site, which is on private fenced-off land, 3 eggs were laid. 3 eggs between 25 couples. All 3 eggs ended up being abandoned. The eggs were later recovered by a conservation group, who found that the eggs had overheated, and thus were no longer viable. The other nesting site I visited was near a public beach. Of the 25 pairs of penguins here, only 1 couple managed to lay an egg, which was subsequently stepped on and killed by a tourist. I did visit one other nesting site near Curio Bay, and here I got a brief glance of the only chick that seemed to have hatched there. Here it is. Global warming has another terrible effect on these birds. As wild animals, they naturally have different kinds of bacteria on and in their bodies. One of these naturally occurring microbes can cause avian diphtheria. Normally, these bacteria can't grow to out-of-control proportions because cooler weather keeps their numbers down. But with warmer temperatures, they can grow out of control and cause the penguins to stop feeding because they get sick. Adult penguins can usually survive this illness, but their chicks typically die from it. In 2006, a heat wave struck New Zealand, and 75% of the mainland yellow-eyed penguin chick population died from avian diphtheria. When I visited New Zealand in January of 2018, another heat wave was occurring. My last day in Dunedin on January 31st, where I filmed most of these yellow-eyed penguins, experienced its hottest day in recorded history, a whopping 34 degrees Celsius, or 94 degrees Fahrenheit. This happened on an island that's pretty close to Antarctica. Climate change also affects penguins in another way. Here's an older male penguin. His mates left him for a younger male, so he's essentially in retirement. You'll notice that he's looking rather chubby, and that's because he's getting ready to molt his feathers. Once a year, penguins shed all of their feathers and grow new ones to replace them. During this time, the penguins can't swim because they're no longer waterproof, so instead they spend a whole month without eating anything. To prepare for this month-long fast, they gorge themselves on fish and put on enough weight to weigh around 8 kilograms. That's 18 pounds. When they're finished molting, they weigh around 4.5 kilograms, or 10 pounds. The problem here is that yellow-eyed penguins typically molt around the end of March, which is the end of the austral summer. This penguin is molting in January, 2 months early. And as always, there is an ever-looming presence of mammalian invaders nearby. The fate of the yellow-eyed penguin looks very bleak. Their numbers have dropped by an estimated 80% since man first arrived in New Zealand 800 years ago. They're considered, along with the Galapagos penguin, to be the rarest species of penguin alive. It's thought that there are only about 2,000 yellow-eyed penguins still alive between New Zealand's South Island and Stewart Island. It's currently estimated that by 2060, yellow-eyed penguins will be extinct from New Zealand, with some estimates indicating this extinction will occur even sooner. We may be witnessing the last of these incredible birds as they march towards death's door. The worst part is, we only have ourselves and our actions to blame. Because of this, the most ancestral of all the penguin species is classified as endangered, with many guessing that the yellow-eyed penguin will soon be gone.
Hey guys, it's Zack Attack. Thanks for watching. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Penguin Place, which is a yellow-eyed penguin reserve here in Dunedin, New Zealand. They have about 25 yellow-eyed penguins that live on their reserve year-round, and you can actually come here to view them in their natural habitat without disturbing them. They also have a really great yellow-eyed penguin hospital that takes care of about 100 yellow-eyed penguins on average every single year, helping them with things along the lines of starvation, as well as giving them probiotics for different infections that they might encounter. There's a link to their website in the description below. Make sure that you check them out. And of course, remember to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and subscribe to us here on YouTube. And I'll catch you on the hook.